And on that score, we turn to Frank Gaffney, founder and president of the Center for Security Policy. How are you doing, Frank?
I am well, Lars. Thank you so much for having me and for focusing on some of these other issues that happen to be of world-beating importance.
We've got to do it. I want to know your take first about the hardball that the administration seems to be playing with the Palestinians, which and correct me if I'm wrong, I've never seen another president who's said to the Palestinians, look, come to the table and negotiate. If you're not going to do that, we're going to start cutting you off. We're going to boot your PLO office from Washington, D.C. We're going to cut off a lot of the money that seems to flow through the UN to this group. And you've got a choice. You can sit and negotiate, or you can lose all of our financial support where it's going to hurt you most first. What do you think?
I think it's an extraordinary breakthrough, and I couldn't be more proud of the president for making it in this sense. We have tried, notably for the 25 years since the Oslo Accords were signed, and we're marking that anniversary this week, the other way, which is to pretend that the Palestinians are serious about making peace with Israel, to give them all kinds of concessions, to treat them as though they didn't actually get defeated in successive wars with the Israelis, but are somehow peers and able to negotiate, at an equal level. And it hasn't worked, Lars. It's been an abject failure, indeed. And what we're looking at is the possibility that this thing will continue to fester and become more dangerous, especially as Iran steps up and tries to intensify the conflict with Israel, both in its own right and through cutouts like, Hamas, the Palestinian terrorist faction controlling Gaza, and Hezbollah, the Lebanese so-called Army of God terrorists now controlling Lebanon, all of whom are getting their hands on advanced weapons from the Iranians with which to attack the Israelis. So I think this is a critical moment. The president is calling out the Palestinians to come to terms, and they have chosen not to do that. And I think it's high time that he take the sorts of steps that he has. He's made it clear. It's not going to be business as usual. They're not going to get the opportunity to have an office here in Washington from which to run their political influence operations against it. They're not going to get this refugee program dedicated to promoting their victimhood narrative. And, oh, by the way, he's taking Jerusalem off the table as their capital by making clear it is the capital of the state of Israel. I think these are tremendous, and hopefully they will concentrate the minds of the Palestinians. No, not sign of it yet, but hopefully he'll keep it up until there is.
Before we move to North Korea, let me ask you this. Do you remember all the predictions of all the terrible things that would happen when the United States moved its embassy to the true capital of the state of Israel, to Jerusalem? And they said there was going to be, it would spark all this violence and everything else. By my reading, and I try to read the Israeli press too, I don't see any of that's happened. It was just empty threats, right?
Well, unfortunately, there have been some incidents. There was a very impressive Israeli patriot, actually Israeli-American patriot, for that matter, by the name of Avi Fold, who was murdered by a Palestinian in a mall in Israel this past week. But by and large, you're right. There's not been, war, for one thing, which was threatened by some, and mass chaos and so on. And I must say, I was convinced that would be the case, that this is going to be something, especially if we did what the president did, which is effectively steal a march by simply turning the consulate that we'd long operated in Jerusalem, in West Jerusalem, by the way, into our embassy, make it a fait accompli. He did, and that was that.
Yeah, I'm not suggesting that bad things haven't happened there, but Frank, to some extent, I kind of expect that on a regular basis we're going to see the smaller terrorist attacks in Israel. I'm not saying it's a good thing. I'm just saying it's sort of part of the regular landscape, and it doesn't seem to have changed dramatically. In other words, we didn't go from 1 attack a week to 2 attacks a week to 3 attacks a week, and that we seem to get almost an acquiescence to, okay, the U.S. Embassy is going to be there, and that's that. But he could still dangle to them that in East Jerusalem, he could say, well, we can allow you to have some presence there if you'll agree to some kind of solution that involves, the creation of a Palestinian state on land that's designated and will be, like the deals in the past where Arafat, was offered 98% of what he wanted and then turned it down because they don't want that. They want all the Jews dead and they want the state of Israel gone. And if they could get past that point and say we're willing to let our neighbors live, they might get a whole lot farther with the rest of the world, wouldn't they?
They could, and the president has offered all of that, I think, making it clear that, what's going to happen with, the claims of the Palestinians to Jerusalem as their capital is still up for negotiation. I just happen to think it's foolish and counterproductive, and the longer they persist in stonewalling, I think less likely it is that he's going to even offer them that possible concession down the road.
And he's a hard bargainer. Let's go to South Korea and North Korea. Tell me what's going on there, and you have a couple of thoughts on a second summit with North Korea. And is it clear to Kim that he needs to come to the table with something substantial this time, or this is not going to work?
Well, that's certainly the message that the president is sending, and I think rightly so. Unfortunately, what worries me greatly, Lars, is as we're speaking, he is being undermined by our putative ally, namely South Korea, which is under the control of a pro-North Korea president by the name of Moon Jae-in. And Moon Jae-in is unfortunately doing everything possible, it seems, to promote the idea of unification with the North Koreans pretty much on North Korea's terms. And I think this is a disaster. It is going to embolden as well as empower, especially with the provenance of considerable amounts of South Korean funding, the North Koreans to believe that they can get what they want without having to make any concessions, let alone denuclearize. And that may actually create conditions under which the North Koreans miscalculate, and we have a new invasion of South Korea on our hands. God forbid, but I wouldn't rule that out the way things are being played by the government of South Korea at the moment.
You know, Frank, a lot of us worried about that. When I watched the South Korean elections from a distance, as I understand it, this guy kind of dark horsed up the middle. The other two candidates pulled a lot of the support, but he managed to get the majority, and it left them with this left-leaning guy in a country that ordinarily leans hard to the right. I appreciate your time, and thanks for coming on, as you always do, Frank.
My pleasure, Lars, as always.
That's Frank Gaffney, the founder and president of the Center for Security Policy.